Soundwave's story is not just about loyalty. It's about what happens when information itself becomes a character's deepest desire. Beneath the visor, beneath the monotone, there's a mind that might not worship Megatron so much as it worships control, signal, and silence. The Sonic Enigma. Soundwave's Decepticon origins. From his earliest G1 appearances, Soundwave is introduced as Megatron's most reliable lieutenant, communications officer, intelligence chief, and ever-present shadow at his leader's side. While Starscream rants and schemed, Soundwave simply listened and obeyed. The contrast was intentional. Where other Decepticons were unstable, Soundwave was a constant. In G1 and later series like Transformers, Prime, 3 traits define his image: absolute loyalty, Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior. May be a meme, but his true catchphrase might as well be Megatron, superior. He rarely, if ever, openly questions Megatron's authority. Emotional opacity, with a visor instead of optics, and a flat synthetic voice, or no voice at all in Prime. He is almost impossible to read. Viewers and characters alike project devotion onto a character who rarely actually states it. Functional centrality. He is the Decepticon's ears, eyes, and spine. The one who intercepts Autobot transmissions, deploys cassette minions, tracks Energon, and coordinates strikes. On the surface, this makes him the perfect servant. But that's exactly where the first crack appears. A character who controls all information is never just a servant. Soundwave knows every secret. He sees every failure. He tracks every conversation. When everyone else lives in noise, he lives in signal. If you knew everything your boss was doing wrong, would you stay loyal? Or silently start planning for a future where you don't need them at all? Beyond the orders. The strategic architect. Soundwave rarely gives orders on screen, but his fingerprints are on almost every successful Decepticon operation. He doesn't just relay commands, he shapes the battlefield, so those commands can even matter. Across continuities, patterns emerge. He anticipates Autobot moves before Megatron even reacts, jamming comms, rerouting enemy signals, and cutting off escape routes. He deploys Laserbeak, Ravage, Rumble, and others as reconnaissance assets with surgical precision, often revealing Autobot positions or weaknesses without being instructed in detail. In Transformers, Prime, he operates entire missions, solo tracking the Autobots' ground bridge, locating bases, and neutralizing threats, while Megatron is occupied elsewhere. These are not the actions of someone who just follows orders. They're the moves of a strategic architect who understands that whoever controls information controls the war. Notice how often Soundwave's initiatives go beyond the letter of Megatron's commands. He preemptively blocks Autobot distress calls when attacks begin. He monitors Decepticon internal chatter, sometimes silencing or exposing traitors before they can act. He positions himself in critical systems, comms, rooms, bridges, central hubs, where failure of leadership would still leave him in control of the network. So what's driving this relentless efficiency? Is it devotion? Possibly. But there's another reading. Soundwave might be less Megatron's dog and more guardian of his own domain. His loyalty aligns with Megatron's goals, as long as Megatron allows him to rule the world of signals and data uncontested. What if Soundwave isn't following orders because he's loyal, but because the war gives him the perfect laboratory to test his true obsession? Total information control, the language of frequencies. Unpacking his true desires. To understand Soundwave, you have to stop thinking in speeches and start thinking in frequencies. Cybertronians aren't just metal bodies. They're living machines whose thoughts, commands, and identities travel as signals. Radio, subspace, encrypted data streams. For most characters, that's background. For Soundwave, it's the primary reality. Imagine, where others see soldiers, he sees broadcasting nodes with predictable patterns. Where others see chaos, he hears structured noise he can filter, manipulate, or erase. Where others experience war as physical impact, he experiences it as a shifting landscape of channels to jam, piggyback, or hijack. In that frame, his loyalty may be less about Megatron personally and more about a deeper internal directive. Control the signal. Decide who speaks and who is silenced. Decide what is heard and what is lost. His cassette minions aren't just cute sidekicks. They're extensions of his sensory and control network, smaller nodes, in a distributed consciousness that thrives on infiltration and surveillance. You can speculate that Soundwave's core programming, whether from pre-war function, experimentation, or self-evolution, might include directives like preserve Decepticon communication supremacy at all costs, prevent enemy information flows, maintain access to every channel of consequence. If those become more important to him than any one leader, then his true allegiance is not to Megatron, but to the ecosystem of data itself. In that sense, Soundwave's desires might be something like this: not to rule cities, but to rule what cities know. Not to stand on a throne, but to be the unseen grid that makes thrones matter. Not to give speeches, but to decide which speeches are heard and which disappear into static. So, ask yourself, if Soundwave had to choose between saving Megatron and saving his control over Cybertron's entire communications network, which would he really prioritize? The quiet coup. Is self-interest his prime directive? The idea of Soundwave staging a loud rebellion is almost laughable. He's not Starscream. He doesn't crave visible leadership or grand declarations. But a quiet coup? That sounds exactly like his style. Here's the case, that his true prime directive might be self-interest, filtered through utility, power through indispensability. Soundwave's position is unique. Megatron needs him to maintain battlefield superiority. Other Decepticons fear crossing him because he knows everyone's secrets. He can erase, forge, or withhold evidence, effectively editing reality for the entire faction. By being the one who knows where everyone is, knows who said what, knows which signals were sent, and which were blocked, Soundwave becomes impossible to replace. That's a form of power more enduring than a fusion cannon. Leaders get overthrown. Spies who own the entire communications web do not, unless someone is willing to risk plunging the whole faction into blind chaos. Tactical self-preservation. Soundwave is rarely at the very front of the physical fight. He's close enough to command to be important, but often positioned back enough to survive catastrophes. If things go catastrophically wrong for the Decepticons, who is most likely to know where to run? Who can cover his own tracks digitally? Who can listen in on Autobot movements to avoid capture? The answer is always Soundwave. His role naturally maximizes his chances of survival, whether or not that was his conscious motive. If you imagine him as a being who long ago decided that continued relevance equals continued existence, then every act of service to Megatron also doubles as reinforcement for his own indispensability. Does he want to surpass Megatron? Here's the tricky part. There's little in canon where Soundwave openly tries to overthrow Megatron, but that doesn't mean he never imagines a world beyond him. His probable calculus might look like this: if Megatron falls and the Decepticons shatter, my network loses coherence. Bad. If some new leader rises who does not value my role, my resources shrink. Also bad. If I remain permanent second in command of the invisible infrastructure, I essentially outlast everyone. Best. That suggests his ambition is not to sit in the big chair. but to be the chair's wiring, the system no ruler can function without. In that sense, his self-interest is subtle but powerful. Keep Megatron strong enough that the Decepticon war machine stays intact. Keep other traitors from destabilizing things too much. Keep his own fingers on every switch, so that if the regime changes, he can adapt by simply rerouting loyalties at the signal level. Is Soundwave loyal to Megatron? Or is Megatron just the current user of a system Soundwave quietly believes he owns? Echoes of the future. Soundwave's ultimate legacy. If Soundwave's true desire is control over information, not simple personal devotion, then his legacy reaches far beyond the current war. Scenario 1. The war ends, but the grid remains. Imagine a post-war Cybertron. The Decepticons are defeated or disbanded. Autobots, or some coalition, rebuild society. New governing bodies set up communications, defense nets, sensor webs. Who would be the most qualified entity to run such a network? The one who has already mapped every frequency. The one who understands every trick of signals, codes, and subspace. The one who can hear threats long before anyone else. Soundwave. If he survives into this era, he could become a silent guardian, monitoring all of Cybertron, or a silent tyrant, able to shut down dissent at the flip of an internal switch, masquerade as neutral infrastructure, while quietly nudging events by selectively dropping or rerouting information, outlast factions entirely, transforming from Decepticon officer into Cybertron's living operating system. In that future, his loyalty would be to the network itself. Leaders would come and go. Soundwave would remain. Scenario 2. Revelation of his true motives. If, in some future story, Soundwave's deepest desires were fully exposed, if other characters realized he has always been more devoted to control of information than to any flag, the consequences would be seismic. Decepticons might see him not as Megatron's faithful hound, but as a quiet kingmaker who controlled their perception of reality. Autobots would need to reassess every piece of intel they'd ever intercepted. How much of it had Soundwave allowed them to see, and why? Any attempt to remove him would risk plunging the entire planetary communication system into chaos. That revelation would force Cybertron to ask a terrifying question. Who truly ruled us, the one giving speeches, or the one choosing which speeches were heard? Scenario 3. Soundwave as post-factional entity. In a long enough timeline, factions might dissolve. Autobots and Decepticons might fade into history. But a being like Soundwave, who defines himself by signal rather than insignia, could easily outlive that era in relevance. He could become a mythic ghost in the machine, the presence that keeps interfering with transmissions no one can explain, an unacknowledged partner in planetary defense, quietly jamming external threats without ever stepping into the light. Or a hidden manipulator, slowly nudging Cybertron into a shape that optimizes for surveillance and control. In all of these futures, his legacy is not a statue, a throne, or a memorial. It is an echo, a pattern in the frequencies that guide Cybertron's destiny. Long after names like Megatron and Optimus are carved into history instead of radio waves. When the last Autobot and Decepticon are gone, will the final voice on Cybertron's frequencies still be Soundwave? Soundwave has always been marketed as the loyalist, the one Decepticon you can count on never to turn on Megatron. But when you start listening closely, a different picture emerges. He is the master of information, the architect of communications, the one who decides what is heard, what is hidden, and what is silenced. Maybe he serves Megatron. Maybe he serves the Decepticon cause. Or maybe, quietly, he has always served something else. The signal itself, the network, the power that comes from being the one who hears everything And if that's true, then Soundwave's story isn't about betrayal or devotion in the way others experience it. It's about a third path, a character whose true loyalty is to an invisible empire of frequencies, one that outlasts wars, leaders, and even factions. In the end, the question isn't just, is Soundwave loyal? It's, loyal to whom? Or more disturbingly, loyal to what? Because when you strip away the theatrics of Decepticon politics, what remains constant is this. Every secret passes through Soundwave first. Every whispered coup, every panicked distress call, every half-coded Autobot transmission, it all becomes part of a vast internal archive. Only he truly understands. To Megatron, this makes him indispensable. To Soundwave, it makes Megatron just another node in the system. Think about how rarely he speaks, especially in versions like Transformers, Prime. Silence, for him, isn't absence, it's dominance. Others need to shout to be heard. Soundwave only needs to listen. That listening is its own kind of hunger. The more he hears, the more complete his map of the universe becomes. The more complete that map, the less he needs anyone else to explain reality to him. In a way, Soundwave lives in a different dimension than the rest of the cast. Megatron and Optimus argue about ideology, territory, and destiny. Starscream obsesses over rank and recognition. But Soundwave's world is measured in bandwidth, encryption, strength, signal reach. How many conversations he can tap at once without anyone knowing. Others fight to own Cybertron's surface. Soundwave quietly works to own its nervous system. This is why his loyalty feels so eerie. He never flinches, never complains, never publicly doubts. That's not how most followers behave. It's how systems behave. You don't argue with a server or a signal tower. They just keep routing data, no matter how much chaos they witness. And yet, behind that mechanical consistency, there is still a will. Someone is choosing what to record, what to forward, what to bury. Someone is deciding when to intervene, jamming a frequency at a critical second, exposing a traitor at just the right moment, or letting a small act of disobedience slide because it doesn't threaten his long game. Imagine the temptation he lives with daily. He knows which Decepticons are secretly afraid. He knows which Autobots are secretly tired. He knows which leaders are bluffing when they threaten war, and which are ready to press the button. At any moment, with a single altered transmission, he could let a critical warning fail to send, redirect a squad into an ambush, and claim it was a glitch, forge an order that looks exactly like Megatron's voice and codes. That means Soundwave could, in theory, destroy Megatron without ever firing a shot. Just a missed alert here, a silent channel there. And suddenly the great warlord dies in a place where no one can prove it wasn't an honest error. So why doesn't he? The simplest answer is that, so far, Megatron's existence has aligned with Soundwave's core desire. A galaxy full of signals to intercept, schemes to monitor, and wars to wire. Decepticon expansion means more traffic, more chaos to structure. A permanent peace would mean less to hear, less to control, less to be. It's not that Soundwave loves war the way some Decepticons love destruction. It's that war generates the richest, densest data environment possible. Crises force everyone to communicate urgently, sloppily, constantly. For a being who lives in frequencies, this is the closest thing to exhilaration he can experience. Seen this way, his loyalty to Megatron is less emotional bond and more contract. You create conflict. I will make myself essential to managing it. If Megatron ever sincerely pursued a world where signals quieted, where networks simplified, where surveillance wasn't a survival tool but a relic, would Soundwave truly follow him there? Or would something inside him recoil at the idea of a universe where there's simply less to hear? There's also the question of identity. A warrior like Starscream can imagine himself as ruler on a throne. A brute like Devastator can imagine himself as the ultimate weapon. But what is Soundwave without his role, without the constant feed of intercepted transmissions? Does he feel smaller, without secrets to hold? Does he feel exposed, without being the one who knows? Does he fear being just another soldier? If the answer to those questions is yes, then loyalty becomes almost irrelevant. He will stay wherever the largest, richest stream of information flows. Right now, that happens to be Megatron's side. Tomorrow, it could be something else. And that's the unnerving possibility. When you ask, loyal to whom? You're still thinking in terms of people and symbols, banners, factions, faces. Soundwave might have moved beyond that long ago. He may be loyal to the continuity of the network, so that no matter who wins, he remains plugged into the core. The supremacy of data over ideology. Because signals never lie, even when everyone else does. The idea that control over information is the only control that truly matters. If that's the case, then Soundwave is not just a character standing behind Megatron. He is a philosophy wrapped in a frame. The belief that the one who controls the story controls the world, and the one who controls the channels controls the story. So the real fear isn't that Soundwave will one day betray Megatron in some dramatic throne room confrontation. The real fear is that he'll never have to. That he'll simply keep doing what he's always done, listening, routing, silencing long after leaders fall. Until one day Cybertron wakes up and realizes there have been many rulers, but there has only ever been one constant voice in their wires. At that point, the question, loyal to whom, stops making sense. Because the answer might be to no one, to nothing. Just to the pure, unfiltered existence of Signal itself, and to the quiet, terrifying satisfaction of being the only one who can hear it all.